Hi, everyone. My name is Abhishek, co-founder here at NumberEight. Before we start the session, we're going to have a bit of a pop quiz today for y'all. And all right, so let's get started. So this is, a few numbers over here to get started. So imagine you have $1,000 in ad spend. From those ad spend, $1,000, you spent, you received 10 conversions, and that had to show 10,000 impressions, and you generated revenue of $10,000. What is what is a RoAS that you will get, or the return on ad spend? It's a pop quiz. You have 4 options, and you have 30 seconds to have a stab at it. You can put your answers in the comment section, and we'll follow up after. The top 3 answers will return back, and we'll give you a gift for top 3 answers. The first person to respond, rather. Cool. All right. Hope you all had a chance to respond. Cool. So let's get started. So this session is going to be about talking about IDFAs, as this is your favorite topic, I presume, as mobile game developers right now. And we'll talk about IDFAs going away, the RoAS increasing. And so, yes, that's a good thing, right? But wait, we need to actually investigate a little bit further and see what's actually going on under the hood. So we'll cover a few things on this. We'll start with talking about ATT opt-ins, or App Tracking Transparency opt-ins. We'll look at things from the advertiser perspective, look at a few case studies that have been discussed today. And finally, we'll then also look at what is actually happening on the publisher side of things, because a lot of talk is around advertiser, but as a game publisher, as a game developer, what's going to happen to your game revenues from ads? And then we'll look at one section on crystal ball and to see, okay, what are the short and long-term impacts of IDFAs going away? And finally, a slide on takeaways, as we always have. So let's get started with ATT opt-ins. You've probably all seen a version of this being distributed over, and if you have games out there, you're probably prepping on how to actually introduce this pop-up and how to show this pop-up to your users, to the players at launch, sometime during the gameplay, in order to, track them across apps and other websites. And this is something that's mandatory, and where the user has one shot to ask, you have one shot to ask user to allow or to not allow. And we are seeing very varied results in terms of how many people are actually opting in, rather. And this is distributed. I mean, here's some numbers that you see for opt-in rates across, reported by different ad tech players. Be from Kaizen, Kochava, AppsFlyer. As you can see, there's quite a lot of discrepancy in what the actual opt-in rate is. And that could be due to a number of reasons. First off, the adoption rate is quite low for iOS 14.5, 14.6 now as of early this week. And then these are all, it depends on where these companies are operating primarily, if it's in tier 3 markets or if it's in tier 1 markets, and what kind of apps they have in their portfolio. That will also define to say, what it's going to be opt-ins. AppsFlyer, for example, they mentioned in the report, social apps had an opt-in rate of about 18%, and shopping apps, on the other hand, an opt-in rate of 43%. So it is quite varied, and we have to wait and see to see what's actually happening as the adoption rate increases and you have much broader consensus in the coming weeks, really. But what's at the heart of this issue? Well, what's at the heart of this issue? We'll go through this diagrams in a little bit of detail over here. So you have a game. Let's say we start on the right-hand side. You have a game today that has a number of ad SDKs that you use to better monetize your game inventory. And there are ad requests that get sent from the app. And in these ad requests, as part of this, there is an identifier field, which is the IDFA, that gets sent in every request. And you have other information that also gets sent, such as IP address, GPS, battery status, and so on and so forth. These are being sent across the bid stream. Now, this ID is in fact then used upstream via an ad exchange or a DSP to enrich this ad request and to make your game inventory for ads more valuable. In order, to find out who is this user, can I better target them with the additional information that I can get from third-party data? And this facilitates a lot of different use cases, such as showing more relevant ads through personalization, retargeting the same user, and finding other users, cross-device tracking, frequency capping, tracking and attribution. All these things are facilitated by the use of an identifier. But as IDs are going to be phased out, what you have now is that all of a sudden, the same ad request that gets sent out will inherently, so that ID field will be zeroed out. You'll still be sending IP address, GPS, the other stuff. But what happens is that for anyone upstream who was previously looking at targeting this inventory based on that identifier, they will not be able to target, because you just don't know who is this individual anymore. So the question then becomes, there's going to be a significant impact on personalizations or showing relevant ads, retargeting, cross-device tracking, frequency capping. All of these things will be impacted. And tracking and attribution, Apple of course has their own in-house solution that they're putting forward through SK Ad Network. But these things, this is what it's going to look like. So let's look at this now. What's being talked about quite a lot from the advertiser perspective. And to do that, we'll look at a few case studies and some of the metrics that are being discussed. So some of the key metrics from an advertiser perspective include the CPM, or the cost per 1,000 impressions, the CPI, cost per app install, the cost per action. So for example, the first purchase you make, how many apps do I want for the first purchase, and the return on ad spend, importantly. So let's look at, all right, as an advertiser, what are some things that we're seeing in the market? So the first case study that we have here, it's from November of 2020, so November of last year, where we saw that company X, or game publisher X, was getting ready for post-IDFA era with WISE LAT test campaigns. And the objective of this experiment was, at the time, to gather insights to prepare for iOS 14 and the loss of IDFAs affecting measurement and targeting. Now, the signals used in this campaign included app category, IP address, location, device type, and so on and so forth. And the outcome was great. The RoAS was maintained. The app install volume went up by 6%. That's great, right? We just look at a little bit of fine print in there, though, in the actual blurb, that LAT traffic, or limit ad traffic, was relatively less competitive. That's interesting. We'll come to that later. And there was an opportunity to acquire users of similar quality at lower unit prices thanks to lower CPM. Again, overall, from the advertiser perspective, it looks great. RoAS is maintained. Let's look at another case study where it says the day 7 RoAS increases 53% for X's games with WISE LAT campaign. And the objective over here for this case study was to acquire more paying customers at scale, with the goal of improving the day 7 RoAS. And the test was done by taking a small subset of LAT users as part of the campaign mix. And again, the outcome was great. The day 7 RoAS worldwide was 13.7x higher, and in the States, it was 3.7x higher. And again, if you look at the fine print, though, it says a lack of competition for this inventory meant that Y was able to acquire more users, more quality users, for less. Because again, think of it, you're not able to send this ID anymore. And finally, we have another case study where it says, similarly, X achieved 17% increase in days 14 RoAS with non-personalized traffic. This is from January of this year on a casual game. And the objective, similarly, how to continue scaling in a post-IDFA world. And again, non-personalized traffic made up the users who had turned on LAT option in iOS. And the outcome was, again, great. So everything looks great, right? I mean, RoAS is being maintained or increasing. The installation volumes are going up. But that's where it gets interesting, because this is looking at things from an advertiser perspective. But you know that as a game, you have UA for user acquisition, and you have your own revenues which is you make money through ads. So let's look at that. We're going to go into a little bit of math and formula, but just to unwrap a little bit of the details through some simulations of what is actually going on and what we think will be happening. So these are three formulae. Hopefully some of you got that question early on right. The first is the return on ad spend, RoAS, which is the total campaign revenue divided by the total campaign cost. CPA is cost per action. So it's the total campaign cost divided by the total number of actions, how much you spent and how many actions you got. And eCPM, this is an important one because from the publisher side, that's what you should worry about, is how much money did that make, total ad revenue, and how many impressions did I have to show to make that revenue times 1,000. So let's take a look at a CPA-based campaign. This is a simulation, by the way, to see, it's a very simple example to show, okay, imagine you have $1,000 as an advertiser to spend, and you want to get 10 CPA, 10 conversions. For that, you need to show 10,000 impressions, and you'll get 50 new users on this campaign. And let's say you make $10,000. So in there, based on these numbers, your CPA is going to be how much you spent, which is $1,000, divided by number of conversions you got, divided by 10, so which is $100 CPA. The RoAS, the return on ad spend, is going to be how much money you made as an advertiser. So you made $10,000 divided by how much you spent, $1,000. So the RoAS is 10. And the eCPM will be, well, as a publisher, I made $1,000 because the advertiser spent 1,000, so I made 1,000 divided by number of impressions, which is 10,000 times 1,000, you get $100. So that's what today an ID-based traffic scenario will look like. Now let's look at ID-less traffic, and let's talk you through a little bit of why these assumptions are in place. When you have no ID data going back and forth over the bid request, you know, as an advertiser, you'll still be spending the same amount of money. Let's say ad spend is going to be the same. Then you expect the same KPIs, but because this inventory is not targetable, you're going to end up, well, you'll have to show a lot more impressions because you don't know who this audience is. It's not going to be relevant users. So you're going to end up showing a lot more impressions. You're going to have to show your ads. And also in that process, you're going to reach a lot more users as well. So let's say 30,000 impressions you're going to have to show to get to that same KPI of 10 conversions. And you're going to have to reach, let's say you end up reaching 100 new users. And in that process of reaching those additional 50 users, your revenue increases a little bit because they might see an ad, click on something before the actual CPA action hits. So in this use case, the CPA is going to be the same. You know, you spent 1,000, you got 10 conversions, so $100. Your RoAS is going to be 10,500 because you made a little bit more money divided by 1,000, so it's 10.5. But the eCPM, from a publisher point of view, you still made the same amount of money because the advertiser still spent $1,000, but you had to show 30,000 impressions. So then the eCPM is actually lower at $33. And this is the part that is actually, we don't have a lot of studies, or there are a few out there that's not being talked about. Because as a publisher, you are going to make less money when the inventory is not targetable. Let's look at another example of a CPI-based campaign where you just have paying users to install the game. Similar thing where the cost per install is, let's say, is $10. You expect 100 conversions, and you need to show 10,000 impressions, and the revenue you make out of that is $10,000. Now, the amount of money you spend is, well, CPI being $10, you need 100 conversions, so $1,000 you're going to spend. RoAS is, again, you make 10,000 divided by 1,000, which is the cost, 10. And the eCPM is, as a publisher, you make $1,000 divided by 10,000 impressions, you have $100 eCPM. In a CPI-based campaign, similarly, you're going to spend less as an advertiser because, again, this is inventory that is not as relevant. You're going to say it's going to be cheaper to acquire these new users. You still want to hit the same targets of 100 conversions, and for that, you're going to have to show a lot more impressions as well. So let's say 15,000 impressions. And the revenue you make will most likely be a lot lower because this will not be the same or it won't be the same whales and dolphins that you use to target as an advertiser. So it'll be a lot less. So we're here in this example, most likely your ad spend will be a lot less as an advertiser, $500. The RoAS will go up because the revenue you made is 5,500 and you spent less as well. So 5,500 divided by 500, so it's 11. But the eCPM drops. So as a publisher, you made $500, that's less revenue, and you had to show a lot more impressions for that. So the eCPM ends up being 33. And this is, again, here we see an example where even though the RoAS increases with LAT or ID-less traffic, the eCPM will invariably decrease because fundamentally the addressability of this inventory is not there. So as you're looking at it, okay, crystal balling a little bit. Now we've looked at it from the advertiser side where, even if in the short term things look all right, you can acquire new users for less. But from the publisher point of view, they're actually going to end up making less revenue because this inventory at its heart is not targetable anymore. So what we estimate is in the short term, advertisers will pay less for impressions. Publishers will make a little bit less revenue from advertising. And this is until the iOS 14.5 adoption picks up because it's been quite slow. I think it is quite slow, and 14.6 now. But in the long term, this is where things get quite interesting, where LAT traffic or ID-less traffic will become more competitive because right now there aren't a lot of people buying this inventory. So once it becomes more competitive, it will not be inexpensive anymore. It'll be expensive because all of a sudden people will want to buy into this, and then CPM should increase. The conversion metrics will stay the same because as an advertiser, you still want to have the same number of CPA, CPI, KPIs. But revenue will most likely decrease because, again, targetability or what makes your inventory valuable is under threat with IDFAs being phased out. As a result, we expect the lifetime value of each user to decrease because the amount of money, the amount of ad revenue that every user brings is decreasing because they're not targetable anymore. So while your CPM is increasing from an advertising point of view, so your UA costs will increase because you have to spend more as competition also increases. But your lifetime value of every user will decrease because this inventory is the same inventory and it's not targetable. If that's not addressed, what's happening there is that the current UA practice of acquiring higher and higher CPM, it becomes unsustainable. So that ROI metric of, all right, revenue made divided by spend on on UA, these could be dire consequences. But that touches a very central issue over here where it might be unsustainable with the negative ROI. And that ends up, completely turning this app economy upside down because if you spend more to acquire new users than you're making from each user that you keep, that's not sustainable. And this is what we see in the short term. There's a lot of, even though things look nice and rosy in the short term from an advertiser point of view, this will come like a very bad surprise in the next 8 to 10 weeks, we estimate. Now, that's the impact that we see. Now, unless we look at it from the point of we need to solve addressability. Yes, you won't be able to target based on identifiers anymore because we can see what the opt-in rate is looking like. But how do we then solve addressability and moving beyond identifiers while still allowing advertisers to target relevant audiences and helping publishers maintain high ad revenues? That's at the heart of all of this. Now, here's what we do at NumberEight. How do we solve addressability? Now, we take a couple of things to deliver. So we use on-device computing, so edge computing, which is essentially in layman's terms, it means all of the processing of data happens on your smartphone itself in this case. And we combine that with sensors in your smartphones, so accelerometers, compass, brightness, and so on and so forth. We combine them intelligently to deliver real-world contextual targeting. What does that mean? Real-world contextual targeting means what am I doing at a given point in time without identifying who am I as an individual. So that translates into in-the-moment targeting that says, okay, end user, we don't know who that user is. They're running, commuting, shopping, so on and so forth, as a glimpse into a user's life. Or ID-less audiences, which is the two ways of targeting. One is habit-based, as I as a user keep using keep playing the game, it will build a pattern for me. And these are the things. This is a way to actually counter this this loss of addressability going forward. And we are seeing this in the market today, where on-device computing has been talked about something 3-4 years from in the future, but no, it's actually here, and it's something that you as publishers should really be aware of and take advantage of. And how does this actually play out? Well, it plays out in two ways. It makes, for performance campaigns, it makes your inventory targetable. Instead of having ID 0000 coming through, you can say, all right, let's say in this case, Uber Eats, I want to target fitness enthusiasts when they're going back home by bus. Or as a brand, well, you want to target, well, as a Nike, you'd want to reach joggers, because as a Nike, you know who your audience is. And I want to reach joggers who are actually joggers. I don't need to know who is that jogger. Is Abby that jogger? That's not as important for me. You don't need to have that information. So as a publisher, you're able to regain control of your first-party data and effectively monetize it without compromising the privacy implications that platforms have put forth. So that's what we have to discuss today. Some takeaways for you is we have an acronym that we coined. It's called FOAMI. F standing for leveraging first-party data. It's very important that it's your data. You should really take advantage of it, and there's a lot of use in that. So that's the F. O is embracing on-device technology, because if you see platforms themselves, when I say platform, I'm referring to the Amazons, the Apples, etc., they are themselves embracing on-device technologies. What does that mean? How do you minimize the amount of data that gets sent out to the cloud and do all of the computation on the device so it doesn't compromise user privacy? And next to M will be, well, ad monetization will be severely impacted. Even though the advertiser side in the short term looks nice and rosy, but on the publisher side, you will see some loss of revenues in the short term, because the adoption rate of iOS 14.5 and 6 is quite low at the moment. As soon as it gets to 70-80% adoption, it will be impacted significantly. And finally, prepare for a future where IDs are actually going away. So changing your UA and your monetization tactics to not rely solely on IDs. So for that, there's a lot of approaches that are out there, taking advantage of addressability, new forms of targeting, new ad formats. We would highly recommend y'all to take these into account. So there's new ad formats such as in-play advertising, in-game. I think there's someone from Christian from AudioMob will be having its chat with y'all tomorrow. Other ad formats that don't rely on IDs. So we have a session coming up tomorrow. Later on today, one of my colleagues and teammates, Emma, she's going to be talking on a panel about what are the broader implications. We can take some questions now. And if you have any answers to the poll, A, B, C, D, we'll follow up with you. Hopefully you have some interesting prizes for you. So that's it for me. Cheers, guys. I can't hear you, Julia. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Abhishek. Thank you for so accurate and informative presentation. And now we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So the first one, how could this affect HC games regarding that they target anyone anyway?
So, can you just repeat that again?
Sorry?
Can you just repeat the question again?
Okay, how could this affect HC games regarding that they target everyone anyway?
Well, it depends. They will target anyone anyway, but then you're probably expecting some conversion metrics on that. You can target, But if you don't have the conversion metrics based on the number of impressions you show, you're not going to be reaching a relevant audience. You can always do a spray and pray approach, which is, you know what, if I didn't get it in 1,000 impressions, I'm going to show 5,000 people. But then remember, as a hyper casual game, you're also going to rely on making revenue as well. So there's always two sides, you know, advertising your game, but also making money through your game. So you can't just look at it with one lens. You have two lenses that you have to take into account. That's a very important thing to consider.
Okay. The next one. Does it mean that Apple will be the sole owner of the user's data, thus they are building their own ad network?
You'd have to ask Apple that. I don't know. That's an Apple question.
Okay.
I used to work at Apple, so I mean they used to be quite secretive. So I'm sure Apple has its own master plan to play over here. So.
Yes. Okay, and the next one. Do you think RoAS is the most foundational KPI in mobile marketing?
Well, from an advertiser perspective, yes. You know, if you think about it, you know, you spend this much money. What did I get out of it? Makes sense. But keep in mind, there's also the other side of the flip side of the coin is, all right, so whose economy is based on this spend, which is the game, which is a game developer or a game publisher who's going to be making money or relying on ad revenues coming from that. If that ad revenue goes down, then you're not going to be able to sustain that ratio of I spend this much to acquire new users, but then I spent $50, but I made $25. That's not a sustainable business.
Okay. And the next one, which KPI do you try to maximize in your games?
Which KPI do you try to, but as an advertiser or as a publisher? That's the question I would ask. As a publisher, you should look at your eCPM numbers.
If you're a publisher, yeah.
Yep, as you should really ask your ad partners, okay, what is the impact going to be on my eCPM numbers in the coming months as iOS 14.5, 14.6, and so on adoption increases? Because that's what will, okay, let's put it this way. You only have so many ads that you can show in a game session before the user gets pissed off. They say, you know what, this game is not worth it. So you can't just overload your game with ads, more and more ads that affect the gameplay. That will affect the engagement, retention, and eventually LTV. So you'll have drop-offs.
Okay, and we have one more question. Any updates on Apple's clarification of the usage of on-device plus sensor information?
Well, there's been a lot of talk around, if you look at Apple's policies, they themselves are looking at on-device technologies. And they explicitly say anyone trying to use this for fingerprinting, that's not going to be allowed. So fingerprinting or identifying an individual, that's not going to be possible. But when you're operating at a cohort level, when you're operating at an audience level, let's say, Julia, you and I are falling into an audience of joggers and outdoor frequent breakers and so on and so forth. There's no way to trace it back to an individual because there are no IDs. There isn't one. So it doesn't rely on any opt-in rate at all. So, and that can add a lot of value. So essentially makes the inventory that will be non-targetable, targetable. That's what it's going to do. So imagine being an identifier, you used to target based on identifiers, but now that's gone, or it's going to be phased out. But you can have group consensus. All right, you know what, this is a group of joggers, so as a Nike, do I want to target this? As an NumberEight, do I want to reach these users to get my conversion numbers or not? That's what we will see across the board. That's what that's what we think.
Okay, Abhishek, thank you for interesting topic. Thank you for being with us, and so see you.
All right, see you guys. Bye-bye.